Martin. We're here for the NLI Office Hours. I don't know who's trying to call me in the middle of my thing here. NLI Office Hours, and this is February 2nd, 2024. We're have in office hours, we answer questions that have been submitted by okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't turn on do not disturb before I started this call. Now I've screwed this thing up. So I'm gonna turn on do not disturb. But anyway, so we've got in office hours, we have a list of questions that have been submitted through a form by the audience, and we go through them. We're kind of having fun here because the questions started out being relatively simple, and now they're getting amazingly difficult. And so it's fascinating. The way it works is that people submit the questions through to a form. I think, Francis, you curate them, and then Martin, ever diligent, takes a cut at them, and then finally we get on here and answer them, which means they do all the work, really, is a nice way of saying that Francis and Martin do all the work. Anyway, and the other reason is Martin gives much shorter answers than I do, which is probably appreciated. Anyway, enough internal sarcasm and humor. Let's get started with the questions today. What do we got? How many do we have today?
I want to say 7-ish. Yes.
We're not answering them all.
Well, based on our track record, we're not going to be able to get through all of them. we do the due diligence of answering everyone, every one of them. Let's just say that we beat the horse to death until, and then we move on. All right, starting with question 1. Curt and Martin, it seems there is a differing perspective on the EU and NATO. Can the both of you, once and for all, make your case and debate the following question? Is the EU and NATO as it stands today institutions that benefit the people of Western civilization?
Well, I just want to say something first, is that we're probably both right. In other words, it's not one of those things. And you also have to understand that I love Martin very much. And so whenever I can find something to screw with him over, I play it up a bit. So let's take that off the table first before you consider it too serious an argument. But okay, Martin, go ahead. And I haven't read your answer yet.
Well, we've touched on it last time a bit, so I might repeat myself, but anyway. It's unlikely this is going to be resolved. My perspective isn't unique, and various people have expressed it better than me, such as Academic Agent in his article, What is Global American Empire, which I'm linking here, and we'll share in the chat. And I didn't finish the sentence, never mind. In short, America helping communists take over half of Europe clearly demonstrate that it's already been taken over by the enemy then. The fact that it posed as nominally anti-communist at a time when it was competing with the Soviet Union hardly proves any correction of this. Curt refers to opinions of people in the system that had moral ambition, but all this suggests is these were people who were fooled into assisting the destruction of the Western world. The system isn't what people within it believe it is. The system is what it does. Curt refers to things like prosperity resulting from free trade policies imposed on the West, but these policies keep us dependent. The prosperity doesn't translate into eugenic reproductive rate, competitiveness with other nations, and anti-fragility to events beyond our control, and as such, it's irrelevant, if not outright harmful. NATO similarly keeps Europeans dependent militarily, ensuring none of us have sovereignty. Despite historical evidence, we are perfectly capable of it. At the same time, all the diseases of anti-white ideology, anti-white policy, degeneracy, and negrification are imposed on Europe. Curt points to Poland and Hungary how resistance is possible, but Poland has already recently fell with the election of Donald Tusk, and Orban only resists via making himself as much of a dictator as possible within a system that's still conceivably a liberal democracy. a system exclusively benefiting merchants at the cost of normal people, a system none of us are allowed to deviate from. Curt further claims Europeans are irresponsible and think themselves above Americans, while America is paying for everything, which I've addressed above. But the sort of Europeans Curt is responding to are the very ones propagandized by the ideology that came from America. Those of us seeing the real problems are powerless to do anything about this. Not one of us has an ability to call up hundreds of thousands, let alone millions of people, and march on our capitals to throw the puppets out of windows and install our own people. Mere protests do nothing. For example, thousands of people gathered in Prague at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, demanding our government not to get involved in any way, and were ignored. We are also aware of what happened the last time Germany truly attempted to resist. So in conclusion, the American empire and its extensions are the most anti-Western force to have ever existed in the world. And I frankly find any support of it inexcusable.
All right. I'm not in my head while you're reading it, of course. The underlying, and I mean, underlying argument, I think you're making, what I view is that you're not doing what I do, which is disambiguating the geostrategic policy from the ability of the enemy to ride on that policy. And so I tend to look at it as, yeah, Europe we Westerns have a problem because of our women. And our women are a problem because they were sold a bill of goods. And if we didn't have women voting, none of the stuff you're talking about would happen, because men overwhelmingly vote in the way that you're asking.
But
So
I responded to this last time, that this is a system specifically designed so it's irrelevant what people vote for.
okay.
That's elites are dismantling the system in any case when people vote against it.
Okay. When you say specifically designed for, I think that's ridiculous. And it's because I have way too much knowledge about what problems they were trying to solve, so that they chose this system. In particularly, they chose what we call concurrency as a means of ensuring that we protected the rights of all groups, instead of just letting another.
I'm not talking about the founders.
I understand that. I'm trying to build the example up, and then we get to the World Wars. Before the World Wars, America considers Europeans the way you're talking about Americans now. And so in that framework, they looked at these violent freaking Europeans. All they do is war all the time. All they do is fight all the time. And it's always over these archaic virtues. And all they're doing is building a world of war. And then the world wars happen. And the Americans take this position of, okay, this is just really bad. Let's not do this again. And they did it again. And so at the end of the war, or even during it, the American view was that we have to stop this. We have to stop fascism. We have to stop communism. And we have to stop this European imperialism. And so how can we do that? And how can we do that? And it was very intentionally Smithian decision. Let's just bring everybody into, instead of let's bring into mutual trade, rather than empires trying to control territory and trade routes, so that they don't have to engage in trade with each other. So the sophistication that went into these decisions to end fascism, to end communism, to end Europeanism, and to try to get the rest of the world to not have any more world wars, that was a profoundly moral ambition. And you don't think so, and that's okay that you don't. But
Slightest.
what?
Not in the slightest.
All right. So as far as I know, that's what they were thinking at the time, right? And that's the record of what they said at the time. That's certainly what they were trying to do in each of the negotiations. And then and that's what their policy was for throughout the whole Cold War, is that we can defeat all these things if we bring about mutual trade. In fact, it pretty much worked. We dragged everybody in the planet out of poverty with it. Now, the problem is the Frankfurt School moved over here and they converted that message into what you see. And I totally agree with that. So my point is only that there's two things going on here. There's one, which was the geostrategic plan, which is profoundly moral, and the opposite, which is the abuse of that, as is always the case, by those seditionists who come here to take advantage of it and to use the gullibility of some class, in this case women and blacks, to be able to destroy that system from within, because the fucking problem with the Northern European model is this high trust optimism.
I must interject.
Okay.
So I think we get, whenever it comes to this topic, there's several things that we need to disambiguate.
Yes.
There is, like you said, the geostrategic plan. I think there's the intention behind it, but then there's also, as the person who asked this question, the benefit of it today.
It
right?
should have been ended in 1989, or 1992. That's what everybody said. I mean, I just assume that that's understood. This thing ended in 1992.
Right.
Well,
I think if you were to answer the original
Exactly.
question, I believe both you and Martin agree, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yes.
that as a UN NATO stands today, it does not benefit the people of Western
I agree.
Europe,
I totally agree.
Western civilization.
And I totally agree. And my understanding is that geostrategically, Americans don't want to pay for this anymore, and they don't see the fruit of it. And the reason is, well, by the time we got to trying to convert Islam, it turns out that Americans went from "we have hope for everybody" to "holy shit, only us can do it." That's what happened. So the Islam falsified the belief that we could create a peaceful world. And in other words, we got to the point where, holy shit, not only aren't we all potentially equal, we're not equal enough to make this happen, and we can't afford the price anymore to try to make it happen. So what we've seen since then is this contraction. My understanding, and I have some insight into these things, is that the rate of which they want to contract things, which was radically accelerated by Trump, the rate they want to contract things is being delayed by what we call the deep state vested interests and all the careers necessary to persist it, as well as those liberals, the left wing, that's trying to continue using the platform to spread their cancer. So I don't disagree with what's going on. What I agree with the strategic military and military position is that we don't want the world to create another fucking civil war by creating the vacuum really quickly. But that's my understanding. I mean, I don't, and I can't argue with that strategy at all. I mean, if we were to cut this thing tomorrow, right? I don't know if you're following what's happened with world shipping right now. My hands all over it. But world shipping is very close to cratering. You know what's going to happen is the world's going to fucking starve to death.
Yeah, and I am saying we have been exposed to that hazard because we have had the free trade imposed on us instead of being able to try to achieve autarky.
Okay, well, I mean, what you're saying is you want to go back to empire, and I'm like, oh, I agree we're going back to empire. My problem is only that
We are in an empire. It's either
no, we're not.
few
That's
empires
that's
or
an
many
emotional
smaller ones.
statement. An empire, if this is an empire, it's the most it's the most absurdly powerless empire in history,
I
because
agree.
the only the only power it has is trade. Go ahead.
If we're an empire, there should be American troops in every country right now.
There is no
Every
reason,
country that America engages trade in.
if we wanted to be an empire, the Americans have no interest in it. I can't imagine. If we wanted to be an empire after World War II, it would have been trivial, absolutely trivial, to put troops and nuclear weapons everywhere to replace every government. We didn't even want to fight the Chinese or the Russians anymore. And it's because of our sort of mental framework. So you go into this thing and I'm like, look, I agree with all the criticisms of what's happening, but I also agree with the initial objective was to end the age of empires and bring about the age of nation states, continue bringing about the age of nation states, in which everybody could trade somewhat peacefully because there were no attempts to produce monopoly on resources, territory, and trade routes. And that was probably one of the most, and it certainly looks like it from all the evidence, one of the best things that's ever happened to humanity. On the other hand, if you look at what rode on top of that, right, which is the left-wing bullshit rode on top of it, I mean, that I totally agree with everything, every criticism Martin put up there. And so,
In the first place,
the
I
problem is, Martin,
consider
you're attributing intentions that aren't there, and I just think that or never were there for the people who put this strategy into place. That doesn't mean that we can't both be right. That there is this attempt was successful, and now that we've succeeded enough that we can withdraw, we can and should, and let the world go back to its to whatever it is. That's different from saying it never had this wonderfully beneficial objective. It did.
what was I going to say?
Well, what you should say is that you just don't believe that the people who put together the post-war strategy and the people who run strategy are better people that are good people with the intentions that they laid out for the incentives they had. When it's
Well,
it's more openly documented.
they chose to fight against Germany instead of against Russia. So Russia had much more
And that was
imperial
more
goals.
wrong. That's not to say that the post-war strategy that's built this thing you're railing against wasn't an attempt to solve the problem. It was. And look at the difference of the success of the Roman Empire and the success of the European empires and the subsequent success of the American Federation. And you look at it and say, well, okay, fuck, where does all this great leap forward come from? That's where it comes from. You can't get by it. I mean, it's just what it is. I mean, the had China gone off and tried to do it, but China had the capacity to do it in 1400, but they went out to the world and they didn't say, what they said was, holy shit,
It's a
these
bunch
are
of
fucking
barbarians. We better just withdraw back to our shores.
I don't want to go. I'm going home. And where the Europeans said, no, these are people who can be domesticated in territories and what entrepreneurial wealth that can be had. And that's partly because the people who did the expansion in the West weren't governments; they were individuals. They're entrepreneurs. Whereas the
Yeah.
people who did expansion out of China, that was the government that did it.
It was
And
all the
so
government. It was all government driven, and then the next emperor comes along. They decided, well, we're not doing this anymore, and they basically scuttle all those ships. I mean, those ships back in the day would be like aircraft carriers today.
I know they're amazing. Jesus. So I
Well,
mean,
I don't agree with the goal of improving the whole humanity when most of it is our competition.
say that again.
I just don't agree with improving the entire humanity when most of them are our competition. Should be
Well,
taking care of ourselves.
so now that's the difference between what occurred and a value judgment. I mean, I'd prefer that we let Germany win. I mean, I can't understand why not. I mean, France is a pain in the ass. And Germany was just trying to recover from what Napoleon did to Europe, right? And right, because Napoleon had really destroyed the Holy Roman Empire. Germany is trying to do that and get a piece of the pie that the Europeans were all playing over. Russia was doing the same thing. They were saying, well, we had this pain in the ass from Napoleon, and now now we've gone all this Eastern expansion. Now we want to do this westward expansion. And so all these empires are playing these games. Okay, fine. The Americans are safe on an island, and they say, "Oh, I don't want any part of this fucking shit." And the Brits, if the English and the Brits, the Americans and the Brits, had just said, "You know what? France needs to get what it deserves, right? And so does Russia. Fine. That would have gone off elegantly, and I think that it would have ended up not with, we wouldn't have had fascism rise, and we would have had an end to communism. So great, it'd be great if we could go back and make those changes, but we can't. So people make the best decisions they can at any point in time, and as long as those decisions are, it's hard to argue with English morality. It's just hard. I mean, they're the ones that ended slavery, right? They're the ones that the Americans are the ones that ended piracy. Those are hard to argue with those things. And so to throw the whole thing out because basically the Jews moved here and women are suckers and buy into it, and then they build the academy system to manufacture rebellious women and a few beta males. I mean, that's just what it is. I just think that it's different from saying effectiveness.
Jews moving into America most certainly had the effect on who America allied with.
Oh, I know, because my people used to run the place. The Jews do. I mean, I understand. I mean,
yeah,
one of the displaced.
I find it hard to believe that they didn't have just as significant impact on post-war policy.
I agree with you. I'm saying the same thing. The only difference that I can find is that we both agree this needs to end. It's that you think it was demonic from the beginning, and I think it was a noble attempt to solve a hard problem that went sideways because of the progressive left, the unification of the progressives and the left in the post-war era, to taking advantage of the vulnerability made possible by the addition of women voters. I mean, I just view it as natural consequence of being stupid for those reasons. But the ambition was profoundly moral. I just can't.
I believe so.
I can't see other than morality behind the mission.
I'm going to interject here that like Curt, I believe the original intention was good from a moral perspective. However, people who made those decisions, whether it's into World War II or the post-war and so on, the post-war policy, did not have enough information or the science, and call it what you will, to predict the downstream effects of it all. And so here we are, one human lifetime later. And I would say that at the time of the war, and even after the war, Western leaders probably thought of physical violence as more destructive than feminine violence. But it actually turns out, when you cast enough a longer view, the latter is far more destructive. The case in point, Germany and Japan bounced back to become economic powerhouses within a decade after they were basically physically destroyed. And look how long it'll take us to get back to where we were, not just advance, but actually get back to where we were after this this war by the woke and PC and so on. It'll probably take at least a human lifetime to clean all up.
Oh, absolutely. That's brilliant.
And we'd be stagnant. Scientifically, we're probably going to be stagnant for the next human lifetime, if not going backwards.
Absolutely.
The thing is, again, I'm just not measuring prosperity, but anti-fragility, competitiveness, stuff like that.
Yeah, the thing is, I agreed with you. My only difference is I am terribly confident the objective and the method were moral ambitions, and that the evil that it's produced is the result of the very thing we in this organization are railing against. And now, and it would be great if people had hindsight and they could look and say, geez, we really ought to let Germany win this war in continental Europe, and restore the HRE so that we don't hollow out the core of Europe. I agree. Do I think that this fucking evil influence that's coming from the EU, the America, and into the EU, that's doing all this dysgenic nonsense? Well, of course, I agree that's evil. I also understand that it's just women voters, and so I can't. I mean, when I look at this stuff, I mean, I'm like, well, I mean, do you want to blame it on the USA, or do you want to blame it on the general Western folly of adding voters under the pretense that everyone can contribute equally in potential and ability? And that
Well,
turns out to be
I
founding
don't
fault.
blame it on women voters because I see how little what people vote for, male or female, affects policy.
Well, so what you're saying is, okay, so you're saying that even then, democratic systems are foolish because they don't produce what the people want.
Well, it's a show.
Okay, so I'll agree with that too. I mean, I don't know what I'm
I
disagreeing
think that's a contrary proposition. So
What?
that's doing it to female voters.
Sorry, what?
That it's a contrary proposition to blaming it on female voters.
No, it isn't. It's just an amplification. I'm just saying that it made it worse. If you thought that the democracy was a way of mollifying the population, I'll agree with you. Though it does turn out that the one thing that it's good for isn't policy production. It's actually making a government afraid of doing too much that they would get kicked out, and that works. But if you were to say, does it produce good policy? I mean, I don't know. In my work here, it says the only thing that the jury is good for is assent or dissent. It's not good for making policy. Matter of fact, it's terrible at it. So I agree with all that. My argument is America an empire? If it is, it makes no goddamn sense as one. And is it what's the objective? The post-war objective is to use the advanced economy and size of its economy to try to prevent having any more world wars, when from American perspective, these fucking Europeans do nothing except start world wars. So I mean, I don't see why that's the case. If you want to go and say all these other things that ride on top of it, and that America should get out of Europe, and in fact, America should go back to not policing the seas, I'm all for it. Mostly because we can't afford it anymore, because our technology and our economy is being equilibrated by the world. But to say that it was some evil intention versus to try to prevent more world wars, I just think it's nonsense.
I think you two agree on just about everything facts related. The only thing you disagree on is in terms of original intention.
Exactly.
It's how I practice parsimony. Never attribute to stupidity that which is explained by self-interest.
I'm gonna refill my coffee, and I think we've done this.
It's
I think
democracy.
The audience can judge.
I think the fact that the democracy is irrelevant, that what people vote for doesn't matter in the slightest. That's the effect of post-war policy, because it's explicitly anti-fascist, especially in Germany. And people, when given the option, vote for fascism. And so the system ensures that they never get what they want.
You know, interesting segue. I'm reading Ted Krasinski's book, what some call it his manifesto. And he essentially said along the same lines that how did he put it? That the system essentially does not allow people to have free will.
No, it's a terrible thing. On the other hand, we learn by error, right? And every error turns out to produce a gain, but a subsequent harm. And so there's this whole problem of any innovation produces positive and negative uh, consequences, as well as positive, negative externalities. So when you say we need to take over from the aristocracy or whatever, and you say we need to have more people participate in this, and that's the middle class, that makes a lot of sense. And when you say if we're going to tax people, we need to add tax workers now who have money to tax, then we need to give them the vote. That makes sense too. I mean, it makes sense. It just turns out that in the end, the more people you bring into the voting pool, the worse their decisions are, because they race to the bottom.
It makes sense if you don't know anything from our long intellectual history. All these things were understood even in the ancient era.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But everybody thinks this time
It was always a false promise.
Well, everybody thinks that this time is going to be different until it isn't, and it proves that. I mean, then we just add another case to the mountain of evidence.
Right. So here's the issue is what I'm going to get to what Martin's suggesting but not saying. It turns out that this is Hoppe, that fascism, which is basically nationalism, right? That's basically what it is. It's nationalism. Nationalism, where the constraint on socializing losses and privatizing commons is extraordinarily limited, and the maximum possible good is directed to the production of commons, which suppress costs of quality of life for all. It turns out that's actually pretty damn good. The problem is, how do you create that system with what we would call monarchy, the authoritarianism of monarchy and fascism by a political system? It turns out that would be the best thing possible if you could not count on bad people getting in charge of it, because power is so concentrated. So, in some degree, the ability to evict bad actors from the government is actually a really good thing. Now, my view is you want a monarchy in there and an administration that can be turned over. So you want both the top and the bottom to be able to kick it out. Because if you put all this faith in a political system, you'll get the Russians or the CCP or something, and you'll have them pursue private ambitions instead of national ambitions. Whereas national ambitions puts the quality of life of the people first, instead of your want to be remembered for being a great leader in history. And I can tell you from my experience, I remember when I was starting to get quite a bit of wealth and influence, that I had to check myself and say, who the fuck are you? Right? All right. Because you begin to think that like it's you rather than momentum. You begin to think you're smarter than you are. And I kept having these little things. Well, I can do this. Who the fuck are you? Right. But the minute you stop saying, who the fuck are you? It's for them that you're supposed to be doing this. Then you realize. But the problem is that draw is always there. And it's there for the same reason I say it's easier to illustrate the private sector is as the bigger your organization, your company, your financial sector or whatever, any industry, anything you do where the cause and consequence of executive decisions takes years to play out, is that you get this feeling of having power but being powerless. Does this make sense? You have this sense and so what you do is you do what everybody, that's what I did, is you go on acquisition sprees, because it's the only thing you can do. That it gives you positive reward. What do you think the monarchies do? What do you think the emperors do? They go on acquisition sprees. Because what do they actually have control over? They have control over the military and that kind of stuff. They get positive feedback. So the actual problem is prohibiting that ability from your executive to do things of those categories of ambitions to fulfill their psychological and natural human need to be able to see cause and effect relationships between what they do. To some degree, Chinese emperors did it better.
Well, China always had a bad emperor problem, which is what you were talking about before, right? How do you prevent, in that kind of setup, how do you prevent a bad emperor from rising to power? And if he is in power, then how do you kick him out? I mean, just look at Xi. There's no way to kick him
You
out.
have to do it with law and an armed population. That's the only way you can do it, right? You have to have an armed population and you have to have rule of law. You have to, and if the emperor gets out of, or the king or the president or the cabinet or the government gets out of hand, then then you do what is necessary. I like the ability to vote them out, right? My concern is that on this, but I don't like the fact that if we can't vote them out, then we're only left with killing them off. So I mean, it looks like.
But that's one of those primary benefits of monarchy. You know exactly who you have to shoot.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I end up with monarchies.
Rather than the swamp or the deep state. You don't know who to shoot.
Because the monarchy's sitting there. The great thing about a monarchy that is an emergency pull, right? This is that joke idiot video that meme I made. In case of emergency, pull, and it's monarchy. It's not so that these guys would have to be fonts of fucking wisdom. It's so that they can justify the people killing off the fucking government when it gets out of hand. Right? I mean, that's the benefit of monarchy, is to be above the law and the restoration of the law, because political systems always fail. The iron law of oligarchy, it will always fail. Democratic systems will always fail for the same reason we get the iron law of our oligarchies, because the collective means by which a decision is achieved does not guarantee that decision meets the interests of all the people who came to that decision. It just means that it's the only decision that can be organized, which has nothing to do with whether it's good.
Well, that restoration of rule of law, I would say that's exactly what fascism is.
Go ahead. Say it again.
That restoration of rule of law, it's exactly what fascism is.
I fucking agree with you. Why do you think? I mean, I go away from this because I don't think it's helpful for us to talk in these terms. But I've said, what's the difference between our work, white Sharia, and rule of law fascism? It's, I mean, I say that as a joke, but I mean, it's not fuzzy. Our work isn't fuzzy. It's clear. And that clarity is. No, go ahead.
Well, white Sharia hasn't ever been like exactly defined, so I avoid that one.
Yes, but I mean, you get the point. I mean, I've been saying for a while that it's, if you look at it defensively, fascism is a really good way of doing it. The problem is that the word fascism means camps and military expansion instead of defensive nationalism for the maximization of the production of commons, which is what it should mean. Because the fascists knew what they were doing. They knew that they were saying, we have French socialism here, we have communism here, and with this fucking Anglo liberalism here, and they're all decadent. And they, guess what? They were right. The fascists were right.
Yeah, I like to point out that the system of the founding fathers is much closer to fascism than what it turned into. Yeah, they prioritized collective liberty, not individual liberty, and fascism is about ensuring collective liberty, which is sovereignty.
So, say that again, because that was really important.
That founding fathers were trying to achieve collective liberty, not individual liberty. individual liberty is used to undermine collective liberty, which is to say, ability to make their own laws and policies that are fitting for their population. And fascists try to ensure the same thing.
Thank you. Brilliant. So I don't like to disagree with Martin. I mean, really disagree. I like to playfully disagree. But thank
Hey,
you.
Martin, can you add that to your list of replies?
Sure.
Because I think you said something profound there, and I want to make sure we capture that.
Profound.
Okay, meanwhile, we've been on this for 45 minutes. Shall we move on?
Oh,
Well,
this
it's a big question. Just to be
No,
explored.
actually, I think look, you guys answered this question in the first 5 minutes. You agree that the answer is definitively no. And for the rest of 40 minutes, we're debating whether the original intentions were good or not.
Well, I mean, that's why I said before we started, I said that the answers were both right.
Well,
Right, and that's the answer. The only difference is the one's presumption. Anyway, and when you say 45 minutes, why does news suck? News sucks because the 7-minute segment. If people had 30 minutes to talk about a topic, all right, they would be able to do what we do. But the reason they have 7-minute segments, right, was like economic. And so what can you do in 7 minutes? I can't even give a historical arc I can't even make the case for one historical arc in 7 minutes.
Well,
so I mean,
news should have just reported the facts. I mean, the news broadcasting, if the thing even exists 20 years from now, because I think it's gone the way of dodo birds, should just give you a list of headlines, and then if you're interested, go scan this QR code, or QR code, whatever, and then it'll get you to the full article. Just report the facts, nothing else. Like none of this talking head, here's my opinion bullshit.
I didn't actually address EU in the question. I think that was originally an attempt to actually compete with America to ensure some collective sovereignty to Europe. It didn't really work out that way.
No, and it's funny to me that the French are behind this, right? So it's not really about the EU. It's about France. So France is trying to get control over Europe, and it turns out that all we discovered is the Germans are still better than the French at everything, right? So that's what we find out, right? So at the same time, the United States is going through the problem of we need to go back to the European model. So I just think it's funny that they're trying to meet us, and we're trying to go back to be them, because the only way you can produce the kind of civilization we've had is by nations. You can't do it by nations and federations. You can't do it by empires. And the American attempt to create a continental empire in order to secure the territory versus the French attempt to create a continental empire in order to what they view as feel their rightful place in human history. Right, those two are that's both idiocies in the end. What we need, of course, is we've discovered that federations of nation states is the optimum means of producing both defense and trade, and most importantly, the ability of people to customize and experiment with social, political, and economic orders that they prefer in their interest.
So I agree with you on the latter two. I don't see how it's the most efficient way of producing defense when you have a collection of small nation states that each have to create their own defense forces, and when time comes to call to defend the whole of the territory, now they're going to have to figure out how to work with each other.
Right. Well,
so it sounds to me like on that one thing you actually should behave like an empire.
Well, I mean, that's the argument, right? That's the argument for federation, is it has only one purpose: defense, right? Defense and adjudication of differences, like disputes. And so I agree. I know, and I don't. And to me, I mean, I I remember what America was like when, and I'm not that old. It wasn't that long ago. It was really obvious when you went to different states that they were different countries, right? I mean, fucking Alabama, man. I went to Alabama when I was like 9, and I was like, where the fuck are we? This is Mars, right? Even go on to Seattle. What Seattle is was pretty Scandinavian originally, and the area was pretty Anglo. And so when I went, I didn't realize how many of my fellow northern New Yorkers, in other words, rural New Englanders, had gone to Seattle. He's like, I mean, I'm from a fucking town with 9,000 people in it, right? A farm town, and I found people from my town in the same goddamn area. Well, how's that happen, right? So you went there, and I was like, wow, I really like this culture. It's a whole different country when I moved to Seattle. So if you live in Boston or Chicago or Atlanta or Miami or Jesus, Texas, go to Dallas, Houston, and Austin. They're different countries, and that's actually how people need to be. They don't need to be told they need to be the same, not at the social level, not the political and economic level. They need to do it. There's low power distance, so they can have what they want and pay the successes and failures of what they want. All this scale does is provide evil like the left access to power to be able to spread their ills.
Agreed. Shall we move to the next question?
Yep.
All right, question 2 from Patrick J. Potter. Firstly, a quote from Julius Evola. The fundamental principle underlying all justifications of war from the point of view of human personality is heroism. War, it is said, offers man the opportunity to awaken the hero who sleep within him. War breaks the routine of comfortable life. By means of its severe ordeals, it offers a transfiguring knowledge of life, life according to death. The moment the individual succeeds in living as a hero, even if it is the final moment of his earthly life, weighs infinitely more on the scale of values than the protracted existence spent consuming monotonously among the trivialities of cities. From a spiritual point of view, these possibilities make up for negative and destructive tendencies of war, which are one-sidedly and tendentiously highlighted by the pacifist materialism. War makes one realize the reality of human life and therefore also the law of a more than life, and thus war has always an anti-materialistic value, a spiritual value. Question: is war the ultimate manifestation of evolutionary computation? Quote, war would seem to be the ultimate stress-conflict disequilibrium to be overcome at the individual level and at the civilizational level.
Well, there's an infinitude of manifestations of evolutionary computation, but there is no objectively ultimate one. The question is always what is being computed, what is evolving. Or will certainly compute something, and there's very clear selection pressure occurring. Or fortunately, unless we radically rethink how we fight wars, the selection pressure sends the world wars, and perhaps Napoleonic wars is extremely dysgenic. The most masculine men being the ones to go to fight, the ones to make it higher ranks becoming priority targets, and artillery being unpredictable and indiscriminate. But it admittedly looks like both peace is even worse in the long run for all the reasons outlined in the answer to the previous question. So restoration of positive effects of war without the negatives by likely means entirely different to war will be key to our future.
Great answer, Martin. Great answer. I was fond of this because you have to understand what Evola is doing and why people like him. And Evola is think of like this as Kant. Kant goes out and he tries to create this rational explanation for the universe so that he can basically replace the Bible with reason, right? I mean, that's simple terms, right? He's trying to justify moral action. And then you get the phenomenalist counter reaction, which is what is experience like? And Evola is kind of it's beautiful and silly. And so it's the perfect target for the teenage male because it's very inspirational that you should go out and take the feelings you have as you're maturing, all that lovely testosterone coursing through your body and making you feel all these ambitions. I think it's fantastic. On the other hand, it's rather ridiculous. A lot of what he says is ridiculous. The fundamental principle, no, it isn't heroism. War is for profit. It's just another entrepreneurial venture. If you go through history and ask why people sign up for war, it's so they can loot and pillage when they've gone out, because it's the most profitable business you can ever get into. There isn't a more profitable business. It's a high risk business, and you could lose. But if you win, I mean, looting and pillaging. I mean, even just take, because I mean, where do the guys who are fighting? They have the money on them. So you have guys running around cutting purses, cutting purses off the dead and wounded. And then you have all the armor and equipment they have. You can have their horses. You can have, you can then go into their towns and just steal everything that isn't nailed down. You can kill their men and take their women. You can enslave the boys and girls. So, I mean, it's incredibly profitable. There's no, in fact, the idea that war is heroic is partly true because you have done something that's usually for the benefit of the commons. But the actual motivation for it is that, wow, I actually get to do something that's not boring farm work, boring, tedious, or that I actually will have the chance of making enough money so that I can have a farm of my own. In fact, one of the complaints I have about the modern military service is that we don't allow looting because
Well, I
we,
would also make the point that in modernity, right, especially what in the last half a century or so, not only we're not allowed looting, but that there's not much that you can really loot anymore.
that's right.
Or, even if today, let's
Property.
say, hypothetically speaking, that we allow looting again, and let's say United States fights a war with France,
Yeah.
what is there to loot? All the wealth is up there. It's in the ether.
Yeah, exactly. So you almost have to provide that um, that incentive because there's no you have to provide alternate incentives. So my point here was that I'm like, I don't understand why you put all this stuff about Evola in there because it's meant to be what Evola was trying to do, was create a semi-religious view, just as the phenomenalists were creating an experiential view, and Kant was creating a rational view, and the French were creating an emotional moral view, right? I mean, he's trying to do that. And from that perspective, I love his prose. I mean, it's fucking gorgeous. Now, he writes inspirationally, whatever, but it is religion. So you take that off, and then the question is war the ultimate manifestation of evolutionary computation? Well, that's a good question, independent of the what was said before. So in the sense of, does war, I think Martin answers the question flawlessly, but you want to say, does war really make as much a difference as all the rest of human behavior? And I'm not sure it does. It has in those places where you've had genocides, or you've had sequential genocides, like the steppe conquest of the European continent. But when we're considering not just those large scale human shifts, but you're saying just the average, usual wars between states, I don't know how much difference it really makes compared to what the just ordinary selection pressure does in ordinary societies. It's like it's
Selection pressures have differed massively. But it's not just about selection pressure. I'm saying that experience that men got in war, it would be nice if we could simulate it somehow.
Yes, that's true. Well, that's what sport is for.
Well, I mean, selection pressure of varying degrees, right? And
Right.
length of time.
So Martin's right. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
I think selection pressure in the last few years was horrible. The best man died.
Yes.
Well, here I would draw a distinction between a pre-industrial war versus post-industrialization war.
Yes.
Pre-industrial war, the selection pressure is actually eugenic in that the strongest men tend to kill off the weaker men and come back with loot and breed and so on.
Exactly.
Once bullets and explosives come into being, I would say even as far as once crossbow becomes a thing in a battlefield, it starts to tip the other way.
I've heard that Pope tried to ban crossbows once because
Well, the Japanese banned firearms. They fought in warring period with firearms, some of the best forged firearms at the time, because the Japanese metalsmiths are really good. And then once they had peace in the country, the samurai said, none of this craven bullshit shooting each other, without being seen again. Real men fight with swords. And then the American came, Commodore Perry came in the so-called black ships, right? Because all the Japanese saw in Tokyo Bay was these black ships, and they can't touch it with swords, obviously. And well, there you go, selection pressure.
You find such mourning of changes to the methods of warfare in every age. Like you have Plato complaining that the traditional hoplite and hoplite battles are no longer viable since Peloponnesian Wars. It's now light arms.
Yep.
Especially Sparta had a hard time adapting.
All right, did we do that one justice?
Yeah, I don't think you can do much better than Martin's paragraph there.
Question number 3. You bring up a critical change in the British Empire around 1830. What were the set of changes that make this time important?
Boy, if I had decided prepared better for it. Basically, at around 1830 is when the Industrial Revolution kicks off. Right, that's when it really, it starts really in the 1700s, late 1700s. But by 1830, that's the sort of demarcation point we usually use for when it really flips. And what happens around 1830 is that, prior to 1830, it's English or British civilization is fundamentally West Germanic. It's another Germanic civilization. It has Germanic rulers. It speaks a West Germanic language. The difference between Dutch and English is something that's been well studied, not too different. And so it's a country has Germanic traditions, Germanic ethics and morals, as well as a Germanic language. And it's the primary difference between it and the other Germanic countries is that it has this tradition before of being a Latin or Roman settlement. So it has this, it has, and it has the conquest of those that's medieval Germanic place by the Normans, who again are just Danes, Scandinavians, and so when they come in, they bring in this more French administration. So there's more. It's easier to do trade in that part of the world in the British Isles because of the fact that islands are safer. There's more coastline. There's good rivers to get to the coasts. And so you have this economic utility as well as strategic utility, and you have the same benefit that Athens had over Sparta, which is that the Germans need to keep a standing army that's a sunk cost, whereas the British can keep a standing navy, which in times of peace generates revenue. And so you have the same benefit going on. So when the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution happened, they progressed in a very clear arc, which is a beautiful map I have somewhere, I can't share it, of decade by decade across Europe. So Germany's a little bit behind, right? The advancement of, and so it reacts to this scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution differently. So what happens in that point is that England becomes starts building formally what is the Anglosphere, different from the Germanosphere. And the difference between the naval and national and imperial mind of these naval traders, just like the Athenians, is very different from the Spartan mind, the traditional Spartan mind of the Germans. And this tends to get you with, what we think of the Prussian world on one end, and the entrepreneurial naval world in Anglosphere. And the result ends up being that you have, besides the time lag, you have, when the Industrial Revolution gets to, and the Enlightenment get into Germany, especially in the 1800s, after the French did their nasties on the Germanic Empire, the Germans had to unify, and they felt like they needed to be defensive of themselves going into the future. And so they did what they always do, which is, we don't have the geography, we don't have the numbers, we have to be best. And so by the time you get into the early 1800s, Germany has become the intellectual center of Europe. It's no longer England. It's no longer the answer. And so you have this divorce between the British optimistic naval international view of the world and the traditional Germanic continental Spartan we're surrounded view of the world. And that divorce happened around that time. And unfortunately, then you get Disraeli and this other crap, and the financialism nonsense comes in by the 1870s, the 1880s, and the Brits sort of lose control of their Germanic roots, and they start to behave a little like the French did, which is they're a little too full of themselves, and Germany stays quite serious. This is normal reaction. Every empire that gets too wealthy develops a sort of laziness, which is true of Americans as well. So what I'm bringing up is that I don't know if how good a job I've just done, but the Germanic peoples were far more similar before 1830 than they were after 1830. And you still see that with the effeminacy and the authoritarianism of the French, and this virtue signaling moral shallowness of the British, which, as long as they can say they are doing something right and moral, they feel they're superior to others. Meanwhile, their civilization is collapsing, similar like the U.S. is. So I think that's the argument I wanted. If I made an argument there, made my case there, Francis?
Yes, but you forgot to say. So you mentioned the French, you mentioned the British, you didn't mention the modern Germans. I think the modern Germans has essentially been beaten over the head.
Right, but they have to come back, right? And they're realizing they have to come back. So Russia's restoring the need to be German again. And if they don't, the Poles will do it. And you know how and the problem with Germans isn't that they won't come back, it's that there aren't going to be any Germans in 50 years. That's the real problem.
Yeah.
So, and they haven't got it around their heads yet that It doesn't matter what social programs you need if you don't have the population to run social programs with. So you're better off cutting your population down to smaller numbers so you have smaller overhead than you are trying to bring in all these immigrants that you think will help pay you for the future, when what they'll really do is generate internal strife, conflict, and the inability to come to political consensus
And it's
and
going to be a
choice.
problem.
Right. So
A
I see it.
what is it? War of Reconquistador.
Yeah, I mean, we have to. Europe has to have a. Europe kicked out the Muslims before. They'll have to kick out them again, and that's just what's going to happen. I was thinking about yesterday or the day before. I was pretty sick yesterday. I was thinking about the need to do a video about that level of issue, because really, Islam's the world's problem right now. It's the big problem remaining, and you
Well,
can.
I'd argue it's just much more obvious problem than Judaism, but Judaism is a big problem.
I agree with you. I mean, Semitism in general is a problem, and you have to get rid of. We have to. I mean, China's right that it says we're going to either convert you or purge you, one or the other. I mean, it sounds horrible to the modern mind, but they're actually right. India needs to purge them, and that's one of the reasons they're doubling down on religion. Modi's and his camp are doubling, and he's taking the religious position in preparation for that. The West is going to have a purge, and Africa is going to continue to have its problems until it organizes a purge. But you're going to have to contain Islam. But I mean, between the women problem and the Islam problem, women problem within and the Islam problem without, it's getting pretty hard to imagine how civilization does very well into the future, despite our
I've
optimism.
been to some western regions of China, um, the definitely outside the Han Chinese area. There are provinces in China that are just predominantly Islam. I was shocked, right? Because I grew up in the eastern, the Han Chinese areas.
Yep.
When I went to places like Yinchuan or Lanzhou, I mean, it's predominantly Islam.
Mm-hmm.
You see mosques everywhere. It's like
Yes.
being in another country.
Well, it is in the country.
Right, and then well, yeah, that's right, because the ancient times they were outside in the olden days, as we say, they were outside the Great Wall, and
Yep.
they're considered barbarians.
So it's like, to me, it's like, well, I mean, there's superior cultures and inferior cultures. If the Chinese want to domesticate the primitives in Islam, I don't have any problem with it. I think that the Western model, everybody's equal, is nonsense. And it's one of our primary failings. Um, but on the other hand, I would say, well, the Taiwanese are Chinese, but they're more advanced Chinese, so they need to be left alone. And so,
I
and
think
so,
there are two groups. You're thinking of Taiwanese as a homogeneous people. They're actually not. I think what you think of a Taiwanese are the mainland Chinese that went to Taiwan after the quote liberation.
go go through it. I don't think I think that, but go ahead. I want you to explain it for the
Yeah.
audience.
So they're the even in Taiwan, as my friends in Taiwan have told me, there are the so-called originals.
Yes.
The I guess they're Southeastern Asian tribes that
Southeast
live
Asia.
in the high mountains. They have a distinct culture. They're the Aborigines. And then after 1948, 1949, you have the then nationalist government who fled, lost the Civil War, and essentially the Chinese government of the time fled to Taiwan. That they're
Mhm.
called, I guess the literary translation is something like they came from the outside, or they came from other provinces. But these were the people that for the longest time under the Kuomintang, because they had guns and everything, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
your Aborigines were, which at the time was under the government of the Japanese, because Formosa, the
Mhm.
island Formosa, was succeeded to Japan for what, half a
Mhm.
century-ish. These
Yeah,
people
exactly.
spoke Japanese because they're taught Japanese in school, and in fact, the word among even today in Taiwan, the word for grandma is obasan, which is
Uh, Fascinating.
Japanese.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that I'm going off of that version. So I think what you're talking about, the Taiwanese, you're talking about the mainland Han Chinese that went to Taiwan. Yes, then I agree
Oh,
with you. I believe it is a superior culture because I have to retain the traditions of the Chinese culture.
right. And look at what they do. I mean, it's an amazing economy, an amazing political system. And so, I'm just like, well, you can't. It's one thing to domesticate; it's another thing to degrade. It's the same problem I have with Russia. It's one thing to domesticate; that's another thing to degrade. And degrading, and unfortunately, domesticate.
The same problem I have with America.
I'll let you win, Martin, because I think I can't. I've already made my argument the best I can. I think I'll let it go. Um. Uh.
So, so kind of going back to Germany, it's
Yeah.
been a human lifetime since the uh, the last rise of Germany or whatever you want to call it, right? And it's 4 generations. So want, if the Germans realize, and I believe they do, that they have a problem, and they want to say man up again, for lack of better words,
Mhm.
just epigenetically, do you think they can still do it?
And
Epigenetics are overestimated.
yeah, I knew what he meant though. Can they pull it off? I think they can without too much difficulty. I think they need to do it in the next 10 years, 15 years, but yeah.
Well, that's a thing. Can you still do it in the next 10, 15 years, or say the next generation? Let's just say a generation is 20 years, right? Can the German people today, do they still have that blood in them to pull it off in 1 generation when for the previous 4 generations they've effectively been
Yeah,
emasculated?
I make the argument, and I know I'm right. Is there 100 million too many people in the United States? How many people are excess in Germany? Well, it depends on what economy you have. In the future economy, there's 100 million too many people in the United States. In the future economy, there's 20 or 30 million extra people in Germany. So you're not going to have the economy that they've had in the past. It's going to allow them to have all this wonderful nonsense. But if you evict all those people that are not German, they live in Germany, but they're not German, you evict them all, send them all back, you can manage with that population and you can bring back a population. What you can't do is bring a population back when you don't when you're competing with a different population.
I'm
So
looking at this from a more military perspective, right? And again, the example I'm going to give is just the example one, which probably doesn't absolutely does not describe the whole. But several years ago, I had a German coworker, and I was thinking, what he traveled from Germany, and what can we do that you cannot do in Germany? Let's go to a gun range. Of course, that's an American response. And his answer, he wasn't even curious. I mean, his answer basically says, "Oh no, we after the war we have those pacifist thing, and that's just not a thing that we do anymore." And again, this is example one, but then I look at the quote German military, despite all this hardware they have, which in certain according to certain reports, aren't all that impressive anyways, especially since they're not spending money and they're not spending the manpower isn't there. Can if they want to take over their country, and when push comes to shove, they have to do it violently. Is is that still an option even?
I'm looking at the numbers. It looks like it. I don't know why not. It doesn't take very many. They could clean the whole country up with 200,000, 300,000 men. It doesn't take that much. I mean, they've got millions. They could certainly do it with they could put together a couple 100,000, 300,000 men. I mean, Germany's not that big. And I'm looking at I'm looking at the demographic pyramid right now. Let me go in demographics of Germany.
Well, the question is, will there be another international intervention?
Correct.
Well, I don't think they're going to get an intervention from Poland for sure.
Say it again.
I say if they get an intervention, they're not going to get it from Poland.
Yeah. Well, it's like most of the West. If you drop your population that much, as long as you don't have a competing population, it doesn't make a difference. For them, they have this huge fucking bloat right now that's between age of 70 and 50. And then, it's narrow again down in the youth. But I'm more concerned about the ethnic
Yeah,
composition.
none of these demographics graphs or whatever. I've not seen one that shows ethnic composition.
Well, I have seen one. I just can't find one really quickly, and I haven't seen one for Germany. Um, uh, Geez, I bet they don't. They're like France, and they don't like to talk about it. Ethnic minorities in America. Okay, here's ethnicities. 41% of the under 15. Yeah, it's fucking bad.
41% of under 15 is what?
Have a migrant background.
Oh, I see. So probably Turkic.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm looking at it. Yeah, this doesn't help you very much. Total foreign
You can
background,
just
20.
drop the link in the Q&A doc.
I just go to Wikipedia and go demographics of Germany, and then um, I think that this even Wikipedia has a demographic pyramid. I would have to go out and find a demographic pyramid by ethnic background. They have a pie chart here, but when you have the pie chart, it tells you a picture in time. It doesn't show you the demographic pyramid over time. Um, so you know, if the German women need help reproducing, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of men in America that would German men of German descent in America would come over and help them recover. Um, I think there was a migrant background, blah 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 blah. 2.3 million families with children living there. 29% of the total 8.1 family. Right, so they got a third of their families are alien in 2020. Yeah, it's a real problem. 41% of the under 15 age group had a migrant background. It won't tell you what the migrant background is though. Um, and if we look at the numbers, uh, they're all over the place. Yeah, 28% total foreign background. Yeah, they're all over the place. So, can they recover? Sure. Because, you don't need, I mean, Canada's only got what, 30 million people in it? 40 million people in it, something like 35, 40 million people in it. You don't need a huge population to make to rebound with. What you need is to not have competitors to pay for. So, sure, they can pull it off. They're Germans, they can do anything. Will they? Well, get women out of government, they will instantaneously. All right.
All right,
So, where are we now?
let's move to question 4. So Curt has claimed before information for deduction will emerge in any given system, meaning that the only method of falsifying it proof is by reconstruction. Closure is only provided by demonstration in reality. Why is this the case? Is deductive logic so untrustworthy? Is this why Curt claims computer science should be the gold standard rather than mathematics because computation and algorithmic logic found in programming is constructive and proofs in mathematics are deductive.
Gee, why don't you ask me a hard fucking question? I don't know if I can do this in a half an hour.
I can try in short that in external world you can never achieve absolute certainty. What you're observing, they always have different causes than what you think they are.
Yes. So
So the goal is just increasing certainty.
yes.
It's
So
like kind of annoys me when people say correlation doesn't equal causation. Like, sure, but the only way to figure out causation is finding more correlations.
mhm.
Well, I would put it another way. The way I think of it is correct. Correlation does not imply, well, it does not equal to causation. But if you have no correlation, then I'm pretty sure there's no causation.
Right. This is a question of limits. Okay. Ratio reduction will emerge from any given system. Okay. So if you understand the concept of reduction, so the world is out there and we have our senses, and I'm looking at this chandelier, and why do I reduce that stimuli to an object, right? That's because it's persistent over time. So existence is persistence over time, and I've reduced some set of stimuli to spaces and objects and limits and walls and stuff like that. Well, so whenever we do something, whenever we do a reduction, in other words, it's like statistics, whenever we're amplifying some information and discounting other information, right? Right. So, so whenever we make a general rule, we're talking about a distribution, and most of the things will fall under the normal distribution, and some things will not. I mean, optical, I'm looking at the chandelier, but everybody knows the optical illusion of the vase, which is two faces or a vase. Which one is it? Right? Or the funny one that's looks like it's you either see a woman's crotch or her legs, or a lamp, right? I mean, you see either one of those. So there's however, if you weren't in a condition where you had partial information, you would not find ambiguity, right? In that case, the great one is the blue gold dress, right? You know, the blue black gold dress. The dress issue, that's an internet sensation. I see a white and gold, and other people see a black and blue dress, but it's because our minds are exceptionally good at disambiguating objects, but they're less good at disambiguating surfaces or fills. And so, and that's because our brains are really good at compensating for light and dark, which is why, you know, if you see the optical illusion with the gray squares on it, one square looks darker than another when it's in shadow, but if you put the squares next to each other, they're the same color. It's because your mind is adding that compensation in order to increase your capacity for prediction. In other words, it sometimes errs.
Oh,
So,
I see what you mean by the blue, gray, or whatever dress. As a
right?
photographer, I just say that it's a picture with poor white balancing.
Yes, exactly. Well, but what colors do you see?
Well,
See, I
I
see.
cannot judge because I don't have a gray card. I
Well,
don't know what 18% what neutral gray is in this picture. I mean,
so you know what's going on. Um, but
the
some people,
problem the problem is the primary colors in this picture are along the B channel in LAB color space. And without a neutral reference point, which is 18% gray, I can't tell what this is.
yeah, right. And so your brain does for some of us, your brain chooses black and blue, and some others chooses gold and white. And I see gold and white, right? And that's just what your brain is choosing. It's actually so this is an example of without the reference point of the neutral gray, in other words, seeing the thing in context, you can be fooled. Well, this is a sort of same thing we see in mathematics. Technically speaking, if I want to describe something mathematically, in order to be humans to be able to comprehend it, I have to reduce it to a mathematical expression, which is a bit like saying I'm producing a statistical representation of it. And so at some point, right, does that make sense, Francis? I'm saying, when I'm watching you.
Yes, I understand that conceptually. I'm trying to grasp the example from real life.
Well, I mean, the easy one is if you're in woodworking and because I've made this mistake when I was a kid, and you confuse the fact that your arithmetic doesn't always play out in the construction of the wood. You actually, when you're building stuff with wood, you actually plan it arithmetically, but you actually compose it physically by trial and error. In other
Yeah,
words, you put wood up
I've
against.
made that mistake before.
Right. So that's the classic example of the difference between an abstract or pure representation and a physical or real world representation. The same thing happens in mathematics, right? Mathematics is that there are many things we can express in mathematics that only produce X probability, like 90 some odd percent. In fact, if you look at most cosmology, they're trying to get within X number of degrees of error, right? For error in order to say something, because the math isn't that precise to the measurements. So how does he ask it here? So whenever there is a recognizable pattern, you will find an opportunity to be able to come to some conclusion about the relations that constitute that pattern, right? I mean, what the thing is made up, how the parts of the thing relate to one another. But that's the closure of the drawing or the sketch or the imagination is not the same as trying to assemble a thing out of wood and finding out that, well, uh, if I actually use measurements, my measurements will never be as precise as actually fitting this piece of wood up against it. So you'll see, like in Japanese wood carving is the best example, is that they will make a cut, but they will make the cut with enough room to use a chisel to actually produce the angle that they're looking for, because that is more precise than the measurement.
And also,
Right?
I want to add that wood is one of those materials that you can sketch it out, but your pencil drawings or whatever drawings are never going to exhibit the grains and the internal structure of the wood. And the wood is not like metal; it's a static object. It
Right.
warps, it changes, it when you put force on it, it twists in different ways, and this is where the practicality of an actual carpenter comes in versus what's
Right.
actually in the drawing.
Correct. So what we find um, is that mathematics consists of descriptions and computation consists of actions. So the drawing is mathematics, but the actual operations to put the wood together are computations. And this is how the analogy I'm trying to construct. And why is that? Because as Francis just explained, the causal density of reality is basically infinite. And the whole point of using mathematics or any kind of logic is to categorically limit causal density so that we can cognitively process it. Does that make sense?
Right, because
It's
we
a
can't
reduction.
possibly keep track of the location and state of every atom.
Every atom, exactly. So, so when you say closure is by demonstration or that computation defeats calculation, that's the point I'm making, is that causal density in the universe is such that closure certainly cannot be produced by words. It can be much more approximated often by calculations, and which, in other words, is important. Words are analogies, calculations are descriptions, and computations are actions. So you account for greater causal density between the verbal, the mathematical, and the operational. And so the only closure of which is what, if you look at our test, my work on test of truth, I refer to everything as ours now because I feel like everybody's contributed to this so much. It's not just me anymore. But if you look to my work on testimonial truth, I've just said these are the dimensions that man can testify to. And if you can attain one of those is operational possibility. If you can demonstrate coherence, consistency, coherence across those 9 dimensions that we've put into testimony, then you can at least claim your statement is testifiable, even though no matter what you do until you produce the action, you never know if it's true. So that's why I say that the problem with truth is avoiding the utopian or the idealistic or the purely mental, and working with the causal density that's present in reality is the only way to know if something is in fact true, is to test it.
But then if computation in this case have its limits, right? Unless I'm understanding the
Right.
term computation wrong, in that there are computation irreducible events. You don't know if you don't know what is actually going to happen. You cannot deduce what's actually going to happen through computation until it actually happens.
Right, you've reduced computation of the universe itself to much simpler computations.
Say that again.
That you've reduced actual computations of the universe to a much smaller number of computations. It's still going to be statistical.
Right, exactly. I'm trying to get there. Martin's correct. So looks like you have the verbal descriptions, like logical sets, right? Then you have mathematical calculations. Then you have computational. All right. The problem is, or actual operations, but every computation you make, right, is still not unique. It's a generalization. So some number of those repeat. It's like saying I can make a computer chip by the same high resolution standards, but God, some set of atoms are going to be in the precisely wrong position, so that when the laser hits this particular medium, it does not produce the chemical composition that we need to produce a transistor that is only 3 atoms wide, right? I mean, something of that nature, right? Or 5 atoms wide, or whatever they are now. And so that thing will fail because there's, no matter what we do, we can't account for randomness. What we can do is seek the point of marginal indifference. That makes sense?
Sure.
When
Whether it's 5 atoms wide versus 4 atoms wide probably doesn't make a lot of difference.
Doesn't make a lot of difference. So what we seek for is marginal indifference. And so a level of precision sufficient to account for the vast majority of the probability of error. So this means that deduction is always proximate. It means sets are proximate. It means calculations are proximate. It means computations are proximate. And it means planned actions are proximate. It's only the result of planned actions that we have accounted. In other words, it's only by action in reality we fully accounted for a reality. So you're always going to have error. This is the problem they get into in quantum mechanics. I really wish they wouldn't talk about it in such mystical terms, because it's really not that at all. It's that the causal density down at that level prohibits us from anything but calculating probabilities. So this is another way of saying even our math and computation reach a limit. beyond which we have no way of observing the causality necessary to do anything other than produce a statistical probability. So when I'm putting those pieces of wood together, I'm limiting the statistical probabilities that I err. I'm trying to get within the point of marginal indifference. When we're using lasers and I don't know if I'm talking about something people understand, but when you use basically lasers and lenses to make IC chips, right? I mean,
Silicon lithography.
right, silicon lithography. So, and so even at that level, you're starting to, that's the big problem, right? Is what's your failure rate of your chips? I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but if I remember, it's larger than you'd think.
Yeah, I think that the smaller, what is it, like 5 nanometer or whatever,
Yeah,
3 nanometer, the narrower those channels get, the greater randomness it produces because you can't control the wavelengths, like which wave that photon is going to hit which part of the atom and so on.
you can't. You just can't do it. I mean, and we don't have any instrument that can do that, and it's questionable if we'll ever. There's a new bunch of guys got an idea now. I don't know, but it's possible we may never be able to produce a thing that can measure that something of that precision. So the point being, if you get my drift here, repeating it, is speech then sets or syllogisms or sets, which is what you consider logic being, mathematical calculations, uh, uh, operational computations, physical actions, um, is what you're simply doing is you're decreasing the margin of error, but the you never have completeness except by actually doing something, the actions taken. And even then, you're always going to have some error involved. So you can't get to perfection, so to speak. You can only get to a point of where your error bars, right, are within marginal indifference so that it can't happen. Now, is this answering what the guy's asking? Um, is deductive logic so untrustworthy? Yes. How precise are your words?
Yeah.
Right? How
So
precise are the method? Go ahead.
the way I look at it, it's increasing levels of precision. You have these tools, and you can basically line them up in terms of chronological order, right? Logic, that's several thousand years ago, and then mathematics more recent, computation very recent, and with each subsequential increase in the precision of these tools, we get to shrink the margin of error.
Yes.
For certain problems, logic may be enough because you don't need the level of precision required with, say, computation. But for certain other problems, you actually need computation. And there may be problems that computation is unsolvable right now, and there may, in the future, somebody may invent yet another level tool with precision that's even more precise on computation. I don't know what that is.
Hard to imagine. So I want to take what you just said and use it to summarize the whole point here, which is that there is no such thing as proof. This is really important because it's central to our work. All logic then can only be falsificationary because there's no closure, right? There's no closure except doing
Yeah,
something.
because the fragility inherent in inductory proof. You can have 10 million repetitions of a sighting of a white swan. All it takes is one black swan to completely destroy your hypothesis.
Right. So there are no such thing as proof. Proof in its origin, it means I can testify that I have done this correctly, right? Right, or that I've used these rules correctly. When you say, so this is the problem. We have built the philosophical history based on a falsehood, is that you can justify, that you can create proofs. That's actually what the revolution in the 20th century was, is you can't. You can only demonstrate that it's possible, not that it's true.
So then I have a question. Um,
Yeah.
when I
Oh,
think of,
can I finish this?
please go ahead.
What instead, all logic is falsificationary. that yes, you may say something is possible, but falsehood is the higher standard, not truth. So it's uncertain, possible, and false is the sequence. And so when you're looking at logic, to say something is true is to say it's consistent. It's not to say it's true, right? Like it will work out. And so what Popper did was flip justification on its head and say all logic is falsification here. What we have done is simply said all logic is evolutionary. In other words, it's survival. And so it's the competition between the justification and the falsification that creates the demonstration that produces the capacity to stay within the margin of error.
So then I have a question with regard to proof, or maybe what I think of as proof is actually not proof. You know those problems in geometry, right? Say you have a triangle, and then or let's just say you have an angle. So we have a plane, here is an angle, and that angle is labeled 45 degrees. And you should prove that the other angle formed with the plane is 180 minus 45, or that's I guess 135. So when I conduct in that exercise, I typically think of that as geometric proof. There are much
Correct.
more complicated examples.
Correct.
But then so then by what you just said, is that actually proof, or is this falsification?
Falsification, it says you would have to produce something. It's proof. It's proof that I can and it's possible, right? It's in other words. So what you're saying what that means is it's consistent. But what does true mean? It means it means unambiguous identity, single, identity, consistency, correspondence, operational possibility, etc. Limits and full accounting. So
The difference is that math and geometry, unless you're doing it with pencil, is tautological.
Yes.
So you're not looking for external world, and therefore there is closure.
So
Right, because in mathematics, when you're proving things, or even in geometry, lines are infinitely thin, angles are infinitely accurate, which is not truth in reality.
Are you testing for if it's logical? If it's logical, it's true.
So, like when I remember, I can't remember what grade we were, 6th or 7th grade, we were told to make the little things so we could go measure the height of a tree, right? You have what do you call it? A thing for the balance bubble, right? Bubble level, and and then you have a straw, right? And then you have a string hanging down, and you look at what's the height of the tree. We'll go ahead. Now, the thing is, for the purposes of that we're trying to calculate the height of the tree, how accurate is that? For our purposes, it's accurate enough. Now, then you get into mechanical things like if you go out and if you have a screw that's binding something together in a satellite, right? Now you have a thing that's got to be the same dimension, to have the same tolerances at 200 degrees below zero and 700 degrees above zero, right? I mean, how do you deal with what does the tolerance happen in there? So to some degree, math is like, okay, well, here's the ideal world. Here's a general principle. And then we have to just add causality to it. So I think that's the easiest way to try to explain to people. Causal density is really high the more precise you get. In other words, does that make sense? The more precision you act, seek, the more causes you have to account for.
The more factors that you have to account for.
Right. So I just want to get back to, I'm going to repeat it again, verbal descriptions, sets, mathematics, computations, operations, right? I mean, at some point, you know, there's no such thing as a proof. There is, you are always only saying that this is possible. And until you've actually demonstrated it, it's just a theory.
Did I miss logic in there somewhere, or is
Set
verbal
is logic.
Oh, okay, set is logic.
We think of logic, we're using logic sets. Technically, they're all logics. I mean, verbal logic is continuous recursive disambiguation to the point of recognition or agreement or disagreement. So it's still a logic, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I could bring in something here is that I'm not sure women are speaking logically, but they do speak logically, sort of, if verbal speech is logical. I didn't get any reaction. I got a reaction out of Martin, but I didn't get a reaction out of Francis for saying that.
I'm the slow kid.
You're a slow kid?
I'm the slow kid in this company.
I don't think so.
I guess I'm the slow kid in that I have to think about it and try to disprove it.
Yes, well, I did the same thing. So Brad laughs at me quite a bit because he's certain he's right, but I'm like, you know, I have to know. I can't just intuit. Um, all right. So do we answer this one?
I believe so.
Yep.
So we have 8 minutes left in the scheduled broadcast. Do we got time for one more, number 5, or should we leave that till next time?
I don't think it's a long discussion.
Okay, let's try it.
We talk about the masculine feminine difference as empathizing versus systematizing. What's not, what's implied there but not clearly stated is others versus me. In other words, the tendency for some people to get most of their information from others and to look for consensus with others and agreement with others, and some people to look for truth, which is independent of what others think. So if you take the masculine systematizing and then you create a bell curve of ability, and then you alter that bell curve by degree of sophistication or education, what you get is a distribution of systematizing of systematizing that is more dependent upon my intuition to more dependent upon my intuition plus my accumulated skill and ability. Does this make sense? So I have pure intuition at one end, and I have intuition reinforced by education, skill, and ability on the other. Right? And I'll just say it's some sort of distribution. I'm going to put a bell curve in there. The next thing is that you have to create another axis across that, which is, okay, now we have the spectrum of grammars, which we talk about in the formal sense of mythology, theology, philosophy, ideology, empiricism. I'm not sure that's the correct order. Empiricism, science, and operations, right? Computations. That we would have that sequence. But also, when we talk about that sequence, it takes more and more knowledge to make use of every single thing in that sequence, right? So from anthropomorphism to pure abstraction is a spectrum that requires, that relies on intuition and increasingly on reason, then almost exclusively on reason, and that hierarchy. And so if we look at this intersection of, here's that distribution of ability and education, and we put across that, now we have grammars. There's a spot here where some very good people are very skilled and they are very cognitive in their ability to express the world. And some people are very unskilled and rely on their intuitions, right? You have this spectrum across it, right? And so what happens is that there is a need for the suppression of neuroticism in some people versus the calm that comes from the absence of neuroticism in others. That would be you and me, Francis. Or Bryan is probably even the best example. And so what happens is the more neurotic you are in that spectrum, the more you need to really hold on to your confidence in whatever grammar you can competently master. Mysticism, theology, philosophy, ideology, empiricism, science, and operationalism. Whatever you can master. And so the more neurotic a person is, the more that person desperately clings to whatever his framework is. And his framework is determined by his ability and education, right? And so you will have people that are not too bright that try philosophy, and people that are very bright that succeed at philosophy. You know, people are very bright and still or reasonably bright, and they try theology or whatever. And you'll have people that have this whole spectrum. And so you get the usual you get the Dunning-Kruger curve that comes out of it as well, though Martin would like to go against that in the context I'm using, and I think I'm correct. You have so you have a bunch of motivations. I need to suppress my neuroticism. I need to be confident in what I have. I have only so much abilities, and I do not rely on other people for my beliefs. I rely on my own judgment for it, which is the masculine systematizing. So you have that. And the other end would be, I rely on other people for my beliefs. I empathize with them and I adapt to them. So one's highly adaptive and the other, right, is highly non-adaptive. So the reason we have a problem on the right is because in the spectrum from, libertarian to authoritarian, libertarian to authoritarian, the middle with the middle and the middle average in the middle, you have males who are both neurotic and always doubling down on what they believe, and they also are not competent and not able to adapt. So what you have is a bunch of vertical markets for people who have to be talked to in their frame of reference in order for their intuition to be able to understand, agree with, and not reject. What, in other words, reject as in the same thing as empathizers try to get together and systematizers try to separate. They're not to reject it. So what you have is a really serious problem on the right of people not being able to unify because they have different means of preserving their confidence in their self-judgment, given that they're systemic and make self-judgments. You add mistrust to it and it goes out the window. You add the fact that if people are unsuccessful in life, and a lot of people on the lower end of the right are, if you're not successful in life, what you'll do is that you'll double down on what you believe and consider everyone else wrong, because your desperation to believe that, to hold the confidence in your ability to act is greater, is your need to do that and suppress your neuroticism is just, you can't avoid it, because if you didn't hold on to that position, you'd see a whirl of chaos which you couldn't survive in. It's a survival mechanism. So if you have a bunch of guys who are basically not succeeding in life, and they have this distribution of grammars that they hold on as their fucking life raft, and they're not adaptable to others because they're systematizers and not empathizers, you're talking about having vertical markets that can't actually cooperate together. So the best you can do generally is to create leadership in each market, all right, which is and hopefully hopefully vacillate slowly towards the objective, or you can create an opportunity to seize that is so urgent and available that it overcomes differences. And some degree, someone like Trump is what's doing that. A great leader is more valuable on the right than the left for this reason. So it's not. Why does it have a? So we get a bunch of so that's the landscape. The question is, why does the right having such a hard time producing leaders and being led? I answered the being led part. Producing leaders is first that almost every one of these people in that hierarchy is so specialized in appealing to their market that they're effectively wrong to everyone else. And secondly, that the left is exceptional identifying people that stick their heads up and knocking them down early, and the other right is happy to do that because they're not talking to them, right? That person is not addressing their market, right? So the right is conspiratorial in bringing about its own defeat. This is the reason I say everybody wants a religion or a philosophy or an ideology. They all want that, and I refuse to give it because that's actually the problem. You need a real solution that people can organize after that gives them what they want, gives them the end results they want, doesn't validate their psychology because of their failures.
Yeah, I take it that everybody wants you to produce a canon, so to speak, in their grammar that they can
Yep.
latch on to say, see, we're right all along,
Yeah,
for
but what
if
they
no
mean
other
is,
reason
I
than
don't want to
status.
do anything.
Right,
They mean, great.
right.
So you'll take care of this for me. That's what they really mean. You'll take care of this for me. I don't have to do it. It's a child response, just like the female is a child, the feminine is a child response. So it's not, but by saying I want to be in your grammar, I'm saying half of what they're saying is, yes, I'm right. Yes, I'm morally justified in getting what I want. But they're also saying, because I'm morally justified, you should give it to me. It doesn't mean I'm willing to go fight for it.
Right. That you should come to me and not me adapting to
Right,
to the reality.
right. Because it's living. Some people, we belittle correctly the left from being so solipsistic that they live through other people, right? They have to all have the shared emotional experience. In other words, they need other people to experience what they're experiencing and agree with it, or instead of what they're thinking and agree with it. The right is the opposite, is that they are confident in their thinking and they only want people that will agree with it. And so you end up being atomized because you're ignorant and incompetent.
So I
Whereas, go ahead.
so I kind of take it as, based on your description, that the leaders for each one of these silos on the right really has to be someone who understands the herd behavior within that silo, but yet not so neurotic themselves that they fail to adapt and cooperate between with leaders of other silos. And the problem here is, if they are that kind of personality, they much rather just get out of silo and cooperate with the other leaders.
Correct. So what you get is what Martin, what's the word for people who just do stuff for attention?
Grifters.
Sorry?
Grifters.
Grifters. So what you do is you get grifters who show up and their whole thing is, can I get attention and validation? Because if I'm getting attention and validation, I must be right. If I can get, some people to agree with me, I must be right. But they never, it's like, well, you mean the fact you get attention from people who are wrong doesn't tell you anything. The question is, what plan do you have that will actually work? It's like the religious fundamentalists. You all can believe. I'm like, no, I can't. It's not possible for me to have faith, right? Like you do. It's not possible for you to treat scripture like you do. It's not possible for most of us to do it in the face of reality. It's about 20% of you who are capable of doing it, but it's not me. I mean, I'm more power to you. Well, then there's people that need this philosophical framework so they can face a reality that's so collidic that they're actually afraid of it, which is where, by the way, conspiracy theory comes from, is that they're so screwed up by it that they need this philosophy to feel grounded in a reality that's collidic and incomprehensible to them, or that they completely fail in. And they can't, because they are what they are, systematizers, they can't just work into a group and say, okay, this is how the group works. In order to get along, I got to do this. They feel compelled to change the condition of the world. So it's why does the right have such a hard time? Is because you have individuals versus collectives. I mean, it's not. You have factions versus a herd. You have packs versus a herd. And there's a beauty to packs because of its evolutionary computation. But there's also a problem with packs, is that if you can't keep them unified, usually by military service that indoctrinates them into dependence upon one each other through that military service, it's very difficult to produce anything other than interest in yourself or interest in your family or interest in your tribe. You just can't do it. So I get the frustration. I see it all the time, and I think Doug is one of the better guy who answers questions, one of the better guys out there. And it's funny. I know that I believe I'm having some effect on him, which is that you can't, if you're competent enough to lead the right, you've got to realize what the clay you're working with isn't peers. They're not like you. They're not the reason they need you is they pay attention to the way they need you, and the reason you can make use of them is because they're not peers. It's this whole equality shit is just all over the fucking place. Anyway, all right. Did I make my point there?
Yes.
You give me that look. I'm like, okay, what the fuck does that look mean?
I mean, I think this is closure on the question.
There's what?
I think you've done this one justice, that we can call it a closure.
Okay, there's closure on the question.
There's
All right,
no point.
Yeah, we're at exactly 2 hours.
All right. Oh boy, you guys made me work today. Now I got to do legal crap I really don't want to do.
Okay, just treat it as brain dead work.
It's not brain dead, unfortunately. That's the whole problem with doing things like talking with you guys over something that's interesting is fun, but look, basically being involved in hostile stuff just does not make my day. I just don't like it. Bad mood material. Anyway, I love you guys. So we're wrapping up now.
Yep.
This is Curt, Francis, and Martin for the Natural Law Institute. This has been Friday, February 2nd. This is our office hours Q&A. And I guess this is live streamed, so it's up on the section of live videos, right? For
Yep.
us to share.
I just need to change the title and add chapter marks.
And that way, once you've added chapter marks, I can send this out to Doug and the others who've asked me this last question, which is kind of interesting. All right, I love you guys. Francis, thank you for all you do. Martin, you know I love you, and thank you for all you do. This is a great episode. We answered some fascinating questions, harder ones than I wish harder ones than I thought we might get to. So I'm all done.
You know, in all these office hours, I always thought like we could not possibly top the last one we just had, and then I consistently surprised ourselves.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you. I expect Martin and I to have these things, but even though Martin's kind of quiet, I like that you're helping us because you are a good actor on behalf of the audience by saying, okay, is this understandable? Have I understood this? And making additional points. So I want to thank you for your contributions.
My pleasure.
Yes. And as well as people don't know, this organization runs at this point because of Francis. So let's just get that out in the open. All right. I want to thank you very much, and thanks for all who watched. Do I hit end or do you hit end? How does it